You remember the late 1990s alien autopsy?
I want to say yes. Is it the I think it's kind of a video, isn't it, where they basically have the typical kind of a gray alien, almost looks like. Was it in America? I think this happened.
Yes, it was something that showed up in the X-Files, and Mulder and Scully were discussing it because it had shown up in real life. So there was this video before the internet was really a thing,
Hmm.
and people were talking about could this be a real alien autopsy because some parts of it um, were made quite professionally. For example, the whole medical stuff, the medical equipment, and then Scully took a look at it and she said, "Oh, but they're not cutting like a surgeon, so this is probably not real." Um, we have a mermaid autopsy.
I'm listening.
1854. Um, and it took place in the Netherlands. And this is what I would start with in this video because that's a great hook.
In the Netherlands.
Maybe we should get a still picture of the alien autopsy video so we can compare that. But yes, so this is supposedly a real life mermaid, and there was a mermaid autopsy in the Netherlands in
Hmm.
1854, performed by a Danish physician, and he also dabbled in natural history, Thomas Bartholin. And he got this mermaid from Brazil. It was caught in Brazil. They brought it to the Netherlands, and I have no idea how they cooled it and how they managed to
Preserve it or
prevent.
anything,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, I mean, we know how Lord Nelson was preserved. Have you heard that story, Operation Nelson?
No. Why don't you go ahead and enlighten me?
Well, that has nothing to do with mermaids, but they dumped the body in a barrel of rum.
Hmm.
And that's how they transported him back to England for a proper burial. But the thing is that the English sailors aboard ship, they drank from that rum that
That
they
had a
used to
body in
preserve.
it.
Yes.
They must have got sick. There's no way.
No, I think the alcohol kills everything.
I just,
Because
I do,
this is not it's not normal rum. They use this to make grog, and
oh,
the
okay,
rum
yeah,
they
but
had, it's like 97% alcohol, so it really
yeah.
kills everything.
Oh, I still don't know if I drink so. Oh, but then like actually reflecting on it, then you've got especially Asian kind of cultures, for example, where they do
Oh yes.
like scorpion alcohols or snake, and where they have like live well, they were alive at one point creatures in alcohol. So I suppose that's not too different. It's still a bit out there.
I've seen those. I've brought those home and I've tried those, the scorpions and the snakes. And there is also one that I haven't tried. That's a Chinese one. It's called the three penis wine.
I'm sorry, what?
It has, well, three penises of different species. I think one is a stag, one is a tiger, and well, then they have another one.
I'm I'm
And
going to I'm going to look this up. I might not put it in the video though, due to
God.
problems, but I am so curious. Oh my god.
It's an aphrodisiac, and that is something that we do in anthropology.
And you guys do love your aphrodisiacs. You're happy to try anything if it means getting your sex on.
I have tried the one that is a spice, and that is the only one that works for women, and it does work, but I didn't try it with a partner, so I don't know how it works with someone else. But I felt something when I was alone.
Not to be confused with magical penis wine. Very different.
No, I don't think that magic. There should be pictures.
there are pictures. Luckily, not of the Oh no, wait, there might be pictures of the penises. Hang on. Nope, that's thankfully not. Okay, yeah, no, it's Oh wow, just. I mean, luckily, yeah, these are all pretty safe to show, so I probably will do some of this. Oh, and then that's a deer penis. I didn't need to see that. Okay, let's move on from that. I didn't know we were going to go into that.
No, just saying. So they probably preserved the mermaid in a barrel of rum or something like that,
Hmm,
because I don't think they had cooling devices in the 17th century.
I really doubt it. Yeah.
Um, so yes, Thomas Bartholin, he's written with a TH, but they don't have TH in Danish, so I'm gonna pronounce this Bartholin. He did an autopsy on it, and it was named after him after that. So it's named Siren Bartolini or
Hmm.
Homo marinus. That is the alternative name. And nowadays we believe that it may have been a Brazilian manatee. So the breasts that you see on the body and the human face are most likely something that is not correct. Um, but this hand that looks quite human, but that is quite accurate for a manatee.
Yeah, because if anything, if it were to be mistaken for like a human hand, the fingers are
Mm,
a little too long. So it definitely
right.
does make me think more of like a webbed creature.
Yes, and Dr. Bartholin said it was deformed, so he was probably talking about the hands, which don't look like normal human hands, but have 5 fingers.
Mm,
And he said it had webbed feet, from what he could tell. Well, webbed front feet, and it didn't really have a proper tail, so you can see what he drew.
yeah.
That kind of looks like a mermaid tail, but it doesn't have the fin at the end.
Mm,
This was taken very seriously. So you have lots of scholars in medieval Europe, for example, who were tracking down mermaid sightings and who were writing about them. And this was seen as an actual mermaid encounter. So they believed that there were mermaids in and around Brazil.
I mean, I could see why, especially in the 1800s. It's easier to kind of still not know everything in the world. You're kind of still in the sense of a discovery phases of even other cultures and countries and everything. So I could see that they would believe in something like this, especially if a man of a fair level of renown, who deals in real creatures and stuff like that, bestiaries and things like we've been talking about. I could see why people would believe him 100%.
Oh, sorry, I got that wrong. It's 1654. Even
Oh, even older then. Well, of course
sorry.
you're totally gonna. That's okay. Of course you're totally gonna believe
Yes.
that kind of stuff. You definitely don't know any better about these things.
Right. So this was not considered a hoax. But of course, we've seen the hoaxes. I've shown you a couple of pictures, and I got the Barnum mermaid wrong too. So this is the actual Barnum mermaid, and the one that I showed you is one they replaced it with because it fell apart. So this was the original.
Oh.
They showed it in London
Ooh.
first. Yeah, it looks hideous.
That face is just a little. Ugh. But I guess it
Um,
makes you think it's like a humanoid creature. So yeah, it's what's up with the fucking tail as well? It gets kind of weird and skinny and oh god.
I think this is probably a shark tail, like from a small shark.
Maybe that's quite fascinating design.
Right, and then you have, let me see, the Jenny Hanover,
Oh yeah.
that dried ray that we've looked into, and there is a very similar thing that was sold in ancient Persia. They called it the sea devil, and it looks just like this. It's probably even the same species. They also manufactured ningyo, and ningyo are Japanese mermaids. Let me show you one. So this looks like Barnum's second mermaid. This looks like the fish monkey.
Oh yeah.
These were manufactured too, and I have to guess that they probably just taped a monkey head to a fish or something like that.
I would think so. I mean, what else? What other thoughts can go into your mind besides just being as simple and lazy as possible? Be like, yeah, just slap these two animals together. We'll call it an abomination, and
Yeah.
people will come and pay us money to see it.
But it would have been easy to find out whether it's a real ningyo because Japanese people ate mermaids. They ate these ningyo beings.
What? Yeah, I mean, you're talking about in stories, right?
um, well, yes, in stories, because they thought that the flesh of the mermaids would make them immortal.
There's something
So I
so
don't know.
fascinating about human society always trying to find a way to either preserve youth forever or to just be immortal. You know what I mean? There's always some kind of fantastic story in some regard about never-ending life.
Yes, and this could just be an ugly fish, to be honest.
It certainly makes me think of an ugly fish. And yet, I mean, I can't say catfish because, it looks like it has scales, which catfish don't. But that would have been my first thought with an ugly fish is it's some kind of catfish.
Yes, almost. And I mean, maybe there was a fish that looked like this, and people thought they would become immortal if they ate it. But I think it's just Japanese mythology. Um, but it's disturbing that we can say that Japanese people ate mermaids because we used to think of them as humanoid beings. So yeah, half of them is humanoid, right?
Mm. Does that make them half a cannibal then?
Yes, probably. But
Okay.
theirs is not like that. They have a human head, and the rest of the body is that of a fish. So I think this version of the mermaid, that is a non-European version, that is probably closer to a fish, and that only has an unusual head or face. It's not as humanoid as the European mermaids.
Mm. Yeah, I suppose that's something I'll leave up to debate for people in our audience in the comment section. Let me know your opinions about whether eating parts of a mermaid would make you a cannibal, because it does make you wonder, right? Because obviously, in like a life or death situation, and let's say you eat a hand, so not a whole person, but does that still technically make you a cannibal because you had to eat human? I mean, I
Yeah.
think the argument is yes. So in which case, even if a mermaid, part human or half human, whatever, does that qualify as cannibalistic even though they're not a full human? It's a great debate if you ask me. So yeah, we'll let everybody have a little bit of fun with that and let me know your opinions. Maybe in the next episode we'll look at some of those.
Good. But now we should go from the hoaxes to actual mermaids.
Mm,
And I've made a timeline. So the oldest mermaids come from Babylon, obviously, very old culture. And
uh-huh.
I'll show you the picture. So the one on the right is called Kululu. That is the male version. And in Babylon, they were not beautiful women. Most of them were men and bearded men. On the left, you have Kululu with his wife. She's called Kuliltu, and they are saltwater based. So the very first mermaids that we know of were saltwater mermaids, and they had mermaids of both sexes. Most of them were male.
Fascinating.
And as you can see, they already have the fishtail. So this form that they are half humanoid and half fish, that is something that was common in the Middle East, in ancient Mesopotamia, but also in Europe.
Hmm.
And not every country, not every continent has it like that. And usually, when you have mermaids with that fishtail and the half human body, that is something that was brought in by Europeans. We're going to see that when we're talking about the African mermaid, because she looks like that, and she's a colonial mermaid. She's not an original mermaid of the West African coast. So she looks like these Middle Eastern or European mermaids.
Okay.
Good. Then in the same area, we have a Targatis, very old coin. You can barely see that she has a fishtail on the coin.
Hmm. Just at the bottom, yeah.
Yes. So these are obviously not legs. And the one on the left, that is a rather modern depiction, and it depicts her with a vagina dentata. And the vagina dentata is a vagina with teeth.
There's a movie about that.
Yes, I didn't know that.
So
This was
it's
something.
exactly what you think it would be like in a movie.
um, well, in this case, this is part of ancient Middle Eastern cults because some of these cults castrated their male members.
Hmm.
Um, so some goddesses are depicted with a vagina dentata. And this came up again in the European Middle Ages. The church didn't like these idols from the Middle East, and they didn't like the mythological creatures of Europe. So they depicted them as monsters. And a sure way to depict something as a monster is to show it as a female with a vagina that can bite you.
Yeah, on what looks like a tarot card. Absolutely. What a way
Right.
to frighten people.
Exactly. But a targetess is very interesting. We'll go into her later. She's one of the individual mermaids that I would like to talk about, um, because she has a European version that is related to some English kings.
Oh, interesting.
We'll look into that later. I'll show you a picture of the European version later, but first we need to go to Greece. We need to find some nymphs. This is a Greek nymph. And as you can see, she doesn't have a fishtail because in Greece, nymphs were not just water spirits. You also have tree nymphs, you have mountain nymphs. So this is really just a general depiction of a nymph. They were thought to be young, beautiful women who were nature spirits and who seduced people. You have the other side of it that is a satyr, and a satyr is the male version. They look a bit like the god Pan.
Oh
Um,
yeah, I know. Or
seen
oh
that one.
god, what's his name? The famous one that everybody would know. Besides the Lion Witch of the Wardrobe one, but there's the
Tumnus
yes, I'm
from
thinking
Narnia.
yes. I forget the
Yes.
other one though. Out of Hercules, the animated one, not the real
Oh, I
mythology.
don't know that one
I
because they
forget his
usually
name.
don't. They usually don't have individual names, so that is probably something that Disney came up with.
Yeah, I think it was
Um,
something basic like Sid. I don't think it was his real name.
yes. And you know that there is a mental disease that is called nymphomania,
Yes.
related to nymphs. So a very high sex drive in women, and you don't call it nymphomania when it happens to men. So if a man has a sex drive that is just too high,
He's called
then
a
you call
sexual
that,
deviant.
well, it's called
And he tends to go to jail.
satyriasis.
I'm sorry, what?
It's satyriasis. That is the male
Satyriasis.
version of nymphomania.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so it's named after nymphs and satyrs.
Hmm.
Um, yes, but we would like to have a look at water nymphs, and I have some water nymphs here for you. That, for example, is a naiad. So you have some specific river nymphs, you have sea nymphs, and she also doesn't really have a fishtail. So you can tell that in ancient Greece, you didn't really need a fishtail to be a mermaid, but these are mermaids. They have horses with fishtails, and they're called hippocampi.
Hippocamp. Oh, hippocampi. Okay.
Yes. So you can see the mosaic.
Ah,
And it's not very clear in the mosaic. That's why I got this drawing that is a little bit more modern that shows the fishtail. And
yeah.
this is something that seems to have been a thing around the Mediterranean and in the Middle East, because you also have that in Arabian tales. In some Arabian tales, you have kings who lead their best horses to the seaside, and they leave the mares alone there, and then the hippocampi come out and they mate with the mares, and the horses that are part fish horse are actually the fastest horses that you can get, so they're mixing.
Fun fact: I was watching a show called Crapopolis. I know, really random tangent, but there is a reason for this, and one of the sons of this specific goddess, basically the people that you follow, his name is Hippocampus because he's a fish man.
Mhm.
And I was like, Hippocampus, that's a really interesting name. And then the fact that you're bringing this all up, and I was like, oh, because he's a monster of the sea. Oh, because his dad was a chimera and all that stuff. So that. Yeah, I didn't know Hippocampus. I didn't know that was related to that. So that's fun fact for me.
It has several meanings. So the original meaning is this water horse of the water gods of ancient Greece. But it also means seahorse, like the actual zoological seahorse that we know.
Yeah, I didn't want to
Um,
say seahorse, but I thought it was obvious, right?
right, and the um, the anatomical meaning of hippocampus, that's a part of the human brain, and it
Hmm.
looks like a little seahorse. That's why they called it that.
Ah, all these connections being made. Well, plus he was the smartest one out of all the kids, so that's it's a double play. That's pretty clever, that show.
Yeah, somebody knows their mythology.
They really do, don't they?
Um, but let me show you some actual water nymphs.
Mm,
So these are nymphs. This is by an English artist, I think, 19th century, um, and they don't show their lower sides.
mm.
Um, so
It's
they
a,
don't
it's to
show.
trick people, isn't it? That's part of the. I'm not saying all nymphs do that, but I believe that's part of the mythological culture, isn't it? Like nymphs would typically trick men.
Yes, they're often not very positive. Um, So as you can see, they have all gathered around this young man, and I'm not sure whether the one standing on solid ground is a nymph or not. Um, could be that the others do have fishtails underwater, and they're trying to seduce him. So in
Hmm.
ancient Greece, you always have these water beings who are trying to seduce humans.
Yeah, like sirens and stuff.
Right. And we do have sirens, but sirens are not mermaids. Um, we started to depict them as half fish and half woman in the 7th or 8th century AD.
Hmm.
So this is early Middle Ages. This is not the original version of a siren as seen in ancient Greece and as seen in the Odyssey, for example. So I'm going to show you the ancient sirens, and they have nothing to do with mermaids. They're just singing. And again, we have the traditional one on the right side and a more modern one on the left side. But as you can see, they're half bird and half woman.
Hmm. Similar with harpies, yeah.
Right. So yes, the singing is a thing that a lot of mermaids also have. And you have mermaids who eat people. Like the Japanese eat mermaids and mermaids eat people. But the sirens are actually not mermaids. And here you also have this rather ambiguous use of their name. For example, manatees are also called sirens. So you have sea cows that are named after the Greek sirens. And of course, a siren can be something that gives an alarm. But yes, they're bird women. So we don't really have the fish-tailed ones in Greece yet. We have fish-tailed horses. And that's why we're moving on to Germanic mythology. That is the next oldest in this case. And Germanic mythology includes North Germanic cultures and West Germanic cultures in this case. North Germanic cultures are Norway, Sweden, Iceland, Denmark, and the Faroe Islands. And West Germanic cultures are the English, Dutch, and Germans. And the languages include some languages like Luxembourgian and Austrian German, Swiss German, like Flemish. So the area where these West Germanic languages are spoken is larger than the areas that are controlled by West Germanic people. And you know that as someone who's a native English speaker, you've been to the United States, so a lot of the world speaks this one West Germanic language. Then let's look into it, and we'll start with one that isn't a typical fish-tailed one, but she is very important. That is the Germanic swan maiden, and she occurs in North Germanic and West Germanic tales.
Mm.
This is also similar to the Selkie legend that we're going to go into
Mm.
soon. So swan maidens are water spirits, but they're also linked to Valkyries, because Valkyries do have these swan dresses. And you can catch them by taking away their clothes when they're bathing. And then you can wish for something. And in many cases, a man steals their feathers and then he wants them to marry him. And if they find their feathers, then he's in trouble because they will leave. They will sometimes take their children with them if they have children. And he will have very bad luck after that because you don't just capture them and force them into a marriage. Like, they will give you bad luck for that.
Yeah, I'm glad that the story has fairly dark undertones to it, and it's not a good message. The whole thing is just not a good message. Yeah, if you ever want to force somebody to marry you, just steal some of their stuff and hold it hostage. Don't do that, people. PSA: don't do that.
So this is an old form of German mermaid. Well, North and West Germanic mermaid, but in Germany you mostly have these river mermaids. They live in rivers and lakes, and they're not saltwater mermaids. You have more saltwater mermaids in England, for example, because it has more coast.
Hmm.
But this is very important. So this plays into the Selkies and Melusine, for example, that you can steal their magical clothes and then they have to marry you. This is a theme that often occurs in European mermaid stories, in that folklore, in fairy tales, that you can kind of capture this supernatural being and you can hold them hostage.
It's so silly that that's what we always think about doing, at least in Western culture. It's just
Right.
quite silly and rude, really, isn't it?
Yes. We will come back to that. We're going into actual mermaids now. So, one mermaid that is also a shapeshifter, but isn't a swan, is the Scottish Selkie. And as you can see here, that's a person who is swimming with the seals, because seals have also been confused with mermaids, because they look fairly human.
Hmm.
Um, And a Selkie is a Scottish mermaid that has a seal skin. And if you steal that seal skin, then you can also hold her hostage and force her to marry you. But she will try to get back to the sea.
Can she? Can she? I mean, even if she gets back to the sea without her skin, can she still basically live as a seal or just be
No, she
alive
has
then?
to get the skin back. That's the thing. So you should burn that, or you should lock it away where she can't find it. In a lot of these stories, the children find the feathers or the seal skin. So this mermaid or this Selkie has children with her human husband, and at some point the children find that feather dress or that seal skin, and they give it to their mother, not knowing what it means, and then she puts it on and she leaves.
And she doesn't always take the kids with her. I get it. Oh man, that's
Mm.
it's strange. I mean, the more you really dive into these sort of things, it's very interesting. Very interesting that a lot of them have similar thought processes in their
Right,
rules.
and this is just West Germanic culture and North Germanic culture, and it also overlaps with Slavic culture. So this is something that is common in Northern Europe.
Mm. What's wrong with us?
Let's move on to one who doesn't get forced into marriage. In Germany, you have Lorelei, and Lorelei is kind of a water spirit. It's not explicitly said that she has a fishtail, and she wouldn't need it because this is the rock that is called the Lorelei Rock. The river is the River Rhine. And she sits on that rock and she combs her golden hair and she sings and she
Oh,
kills people.
that's pretty sweet. Okay.
So you have these fishermen, and they're just trying to make a living. They're on the river with their little boats, and they hear her singing, and they look up to her, and she's very beautiful. She has a comb and a mirror, And they're so distracted by her singing and by her beauty that they crash into the rocks at the bottom of that large rock. So they sink and they drown.
Is it is it a deep river?
Sorry, what?
Is it a deep river?
Yes, it's one of the largest rivers in Germany.
Oh, okay. So yeah, that's that. Okay, that lines up. Because otherwise, I'd be like, could they just not swim or something?
Well, people in ancient times often couldn't swim, and that didn't really change until the middle of the 20th century, when schools picked up on that and started to teach children how to swim. For example, in my school, we learned how to swim. At least those of us who hadn't already learned it from their parents. But my grandfather, for example, couldn't swim. He lived in the countryside. He wasn't close to any big rivers, lakes, or the coast. So he never learned to swim, and that was it for most people who didn't live to a larger water source. That went on until about the 1960s, and even the British Navy used people who couldn't swim for their ships. They used them as crew, and they preferred people who couldn't swim as crew. Can you imagine why?
um, I mean, my first thought is they're cheaper, but I don't think that's the reason. I think it's more to do with the fact that if anything went wrong, the majority of them would die, and then they don't get paid.
That would be an interesting thought, but it's far worse.
Oh, it's even worse than that. Okay.
It's worse than not having to pay them because the Navy thought that people who couldn't swim would make better sailors because they would be more motivated to defend the ship in war.
I see. I see. It's all just silly thinking. I just I don't know. But I guess at the same time, we have people go in the air, and it's not like we can fly. We use
Yes.
machines to do that. So I guess that's a similar logic. But we don't put people on aircraft because we think, yeah, they're totally going to make sure the airplane stays in the sky. Yeah, okay. It's
I mean,
it's a different way of thinking.
we do have parachutes, so you
That's true.
can get out relatively safely nowadays, depending on how high you're flying.
Hmm.
um, but I found that evil that they would say, "Oh, yeah, they will be more motivated to defend the ship because they can't swim." So either they go down with it or they put in some effort to protect the ship.
It is certainly some backwards thinking. You were very right.
Yes, but that's the thing. So most people could not swim in ancient times, and like up to the 20th century, most people could not swim. Um, so even these fishermen on the Rhine, they could not swim and they would drown. And it was not something that Lorelei was planning to do. So she wasn't sitting there and waiting for them and starting to sing to distract them and to kill them.
Hmm.
It just happened, and nobody knows why she sat there. So this was just her spot, and it was a very dangerous spot. People should have stayed away from it.
Yeah, or you think they'd have like warning signs or anything. But no, I guess it's just, yeah, it's fine. We all know she's there and this is what she does. Just, it's all just unwritten rules.
Right. Then we have the Bride Lakes legend. So this is the actual Bride Lake in northern Germany. And these are also just water spirits, the brides that live in Bride Lake. Um, and there used to be bride lakes all over northern Europe. So this is something that is also common in Slavic areas. This was common in Denmark and in southern Scandinavia. I don't know if there are any bride lakes in England, but it's possible because, as I said, West Germanic people.
Hmm.
There are some in the Netherlands, and it's called a bride lake because brides used to go into the water to end their life there.
Oh,
And yes,
got
so I
dark
know
very
we can't
quickly.
say the weight. Sorry, I know we can't say the word on YouTube. But yes, it's that kind of lake, and it's a very spooky story because these brides turn into ghosts. So when you go there at night, then you can see the mist on the lake, and that is the dancing brides dancing on the water. And if you're a man who has ever harmed a woman, then some of them will come out and come after you.
I think that's fair. Yeah, I think it's acceptable. Shouldn't hurt people.
Right. So some of them have been left at the altar. They just went into the water because they were betrayed by their soon to be husbands.
Mm.
Um, some of them have been tricked into sleeping with their fiancés who wouldn't marry them afterwards. And some of them were forced into that kind of action. These are the angry brides that will come out and will come after you if you're a man who has done something like this.
Mm.
But they also have sad brides, and the sad brides are not dangerous. They're just women who never got to marry, for example. Spinsters who realized that it was too late for them to start a family. They would also go into the lake. And in some cases, they're widowed brides. So they got married, but their husband went to war soon after that. So they had no time to really be a wife. And if he didn't return, if he died in war, they would also go into the lake. Um, you have swans on these lakes, and you often have water lilies on those lakes. And it's a complex history because the swans, of course, are a reference to the swan maidens that we've talked about,
Mm.
these mythological mermaids. And the water lilies symbolize dead children.
Oh.
Yes, so sometimes they would kill a child if they had become pregnant and couldn't keep it. Sometimes they would be pregnant after they had been forced.
Mm.
So they would go in the water as pregnant women, and of course, that would kill the child too. Um, so when you look at these dancing brides at the mist on the lake, and you see some swans coming over, and there are some water lilies, that is a really spooky. No, sorry, that is a really spooky scene.
Yeah.
That is something that would be told as a horror tale. And people gave their sons a warning using these lakes. They would say, never be mean to a woman. The angry brides from Bride's Lake will get you.
That is spooky.
Yes.
But it keeps people in check, so that's good.
Right. So this was used to remind men that they should be nice to women. Okay.
It should be an unspoken rule, but it's good that it's reinforced.
The most well-known Germanic mermaid is The Little Mermaid by Hans Christian Andersen, the Danish author. And this is what we use to make movies like Ariel, The Little Mermaid.
That's right.
And this is linked to the Slavic rusalkas. Rusalkas are Slavic river and lake mermaids. Um, and this is also linked to the Bride Lakes legend because she's betrayed. So the tale doesn't end as well as it ends in the Disney version.
Oh.
Yes, she doesn't manage to get the prince, so she has to die.
Oh, yeah, I could see why Disney might not have gone with that ending.
It's a bit darker.
It's a bit darker. Yeah.
Right, and the whole thing. So this story with the sea witch that gives her legs and that takes her voice away, and this whole plan to find a human husband, all of that is very close to the Rusalka legend of Slavic areas. So I'll show you Rusalka. That is a spooky image.
That is a spooky image. Really cool, though.
Yes. In this case, you also have someone who goes into a lake because they have been betrayed. That is the common background story of the Rusalka, of the Slavic mermaid. And, well, these are freshwater mermaids. They usually live in lakes or rivers. So this could be connected to the Bride Lakes legend, simply because they also live in lakes and they went into the water because they had been betrayed. Very, very similar. And they are usually bad brides. You could call them bad brides. So people until the mid 20th century had a certain idea of what a good bride should behave like. And Rusalkas behave like the absolute opposite. They're very bad girls. And they try to lure men into the water, and they attack people. So usually they're not presented as something positive. But there is an opera that is called Rusalka. So that gives it a little bit more of a positive turn.
Hmm.
Side note, we might want to find an aria or something from that opera. We could use that as background music, if that's allowed. Then let's move to the islands, to Celtic mythology. Did you know that there is an English mermaid named Sabrina?
Sabrina? No.
Okay, this is Sabrina, and it's a water goddess or nymph or mermaid that lives in the River Severn.
Hmm.
So England has its own river mermaid, but I know that she's not very well known, even among English people.
Yeah, no kidding. So I'll ask my dad, see if he's heard of her.
Right. Yes, and she has been known since Roman times, and her name Sabrina actually means the goddess of the River Severn. So Sabrina and Severn, those are two names that diverged after Roman times, but that used to be the same name, the river and the queen of the river.
Oh, okay.
And that's where the name comes from. So if you know anyone who's named Sabrina, they have their name from that river goddess.
That's pretty cool.
Yes. I've already shown you the Selkies. In Ireland, you have Merrow folk.
Mm-hmm.
So different name, pretty ordinary mermaids. But as far as I know, you have some more male mermaids, well, some mermen in the Merrow folk legend. And in continental Europe, it's very often just a female mermaid, and even the Selkies. So I don't know whether there is any story about a male Selkie, but yeah, most of them are female.
Yeah, but I wouldn't know off the top of my head. I'd have to look. But yeah, it doesn't sound
I
like something I
think
would have
there are.
heard about. Yeah, it doesn't sound very common. A male selkie.
Yes, but I think there are some, but they're probably rare. Okay, then let's go to France. So, as you can see, we have a woman bathing here, and her reptilian tail shows and her reptilian wings, and that is
Yeah.
Melusine. And you've seen her. I'm pretty sure that you have seen her on a coffee cup because
Yeah.
she's the mermaid on the old Starbucks logo.
Oh.
Um,
Oh, yeah, okay.
and this is a pretty long story. So, Melusine is actually a Targatis that we've already talked about, the
Mm.
Middle Eastern mermaid with the fishtail, or rather with a reptilian tail, because it's not always a fishtail. It's quite reptilian, so it could be a water reptile or something like that. In some cases, a Targatis is depicted as only having a human head, and the rest is a serpent or a dragon. And in other tales, she is half human and half serpent. So she looks pretty much like a mermaid, and you've seen that picture with the vagina dentata, where she really has this mermaid tail. But the original Atargatis was more snake-like. She was a water goddess, but still more like a water reptile. And Melusine is depicted as a water spirit. She was picked up in the Middle East by some French crusaders. Um, and these crusaders were rich, famous, and powerful crusaders. Her husband, well, the guy who took her home to France and married her, was Guy de Lusignan, the Count of Poitou. so French count, met her in the Middle East, took her home, didn't know she was that snake hybrid. Apparently, she was good at hiding it. And she probably wore very long skirts, so he couldn't see anything.
Smart.
And the Counts of Lusignan, they are a dynasty that ruled the island of Cyprus for more than 250 years. So they were kings of Cyprus. And parts of the family also were kings of Armenia and kings of Jerusalem. It's a French dynasty, but they owned all this land in the Holy Land and around the Holy Land. So they were crusader kings. They were quite powerful. And they're related to the English Plantagenet dynasty.
Oh, okay.
That is about, I think, early 14th century, late 13th, early 14th century.
Sounds about right.
And they got, the Lusignan family was given a prophecy that some of them would become kings of England. And that actually came true because, they're related to this dynasty in England. The name Melusine is not her actual name. It's more like a description because it's Mère Lusignan. That's where it comes from. So Melusine is Mère Lusignan, the mother of the Lusignan family. So you see the picture of her. She's taking a bath, and her husband is outside of the door. He's the guy in red, and his name is literally Guy. So in French, that is Guy, but it's the name Guy. That is where the name Guy comes from. He walks in on her while she's taking a bath, and she had told him that he cannot do this because when she takes a bath, she is shedding. So this is really like a snake or some other reptile that they need to shed their skin from time to time. And she does that when she's in the bath. That is quite accurate to how snakes and lizards do this. They do it best when they're in a moist environment. And it helps them to shed when you spray them with some water. So she's in the bath, she's trying to shed, and they had talked about this, that he can never walk in on her while she's in the bath. But he does. So he sees that her lower parts are reptilian. And he did not know this. The thing is, they had children, so how did he not know this?
I guess adoption's an option, am I right? He is an oblivious Frenchman. It's fine.
Yeah, so apparently he didn't feel this. He didn't feel the scales. You can see that she has wings. He didn't feel any of that. So now he walks in on her in broad daylight. He sees this. He's shocked, and she leaves. And after that, he has a series of very bad events happening to him and his family. So they get this bad luck. And this is why we had to talk about the Swan Maidens, because this is exactly what happens when a Swan Maiden leaves you, or when a Selkie leaves you.
And you get all the bad luck.
Right. So this is a mixture between this Middle Eastern serpent goddess and Germanic mythology, which also exists in France, because France is named after a Germanic tribe. So they also have this Swan Maiden thing going on. They know about this. And then she went to the Americas, to Seattle precisely, and she became the Starbucks logo. At least that's what some people have suspected. So Starbucks has never confirmed this, but there are people who say, okay, this seems to be Melusine, and she has two tails to symbolize that she exists on two continents now, that she came from Eurasia and now she's in the Americas. So each tail represents a continent.
Okay, I can see that.
Right. So Starbucks officially has a reptilian mermaid goddess as a symbol.
It's pretty cool. They should really lean into that, instead of the influencer direction.
Right.
Focus on the mythological aspects. I think that's really cool. I'd definitely drink there more if they were like, we love mythology. Mezzaloon is our she's our mascot. She works in our basement. It just be fun, you know.
She works in her basement.
Yeah, she goes by Starbuck now. We don't know why. It's just what she picked up when she came to the Americas. She changed her name. That's why we're Starbucks, and it'd just be fun if they just did goofy stuff like that.
Yes, that would be cool. And by the way, I've shared this with Vintage 8, and I've asked him whether he wants this for his series about Louisiana.
Oh.
You know, he has this Louisiana series going on with the Tangi virus and
Oh,
so on.
I am well aware. I am well
Right.
aware. We've seen tons of his stuff. He's quite the storyteller.
Yes, and I've talked to him. I've proposed this to him. I've given him some more information about Melusine and Atargatis. Apparently, he doesn't like the idea that she's part reptilian because he thinks that would touch modern politics in a way that's not good.
Oh,
Because you know all these
because people are lizard people, right?
right these conspiracy theories about lizard shapeshifters in political office. I do understand that, but it would be really cool. So Louisiana was, as you know, a French colony, and the United States got it
Mm-hmm.
as one of their states later on. So there's a lot of French culture, and it would be a perfect demon goddess for Louisiana.
Absolutely.
Yes, so maybe we're going to see that. But as for now, he's not working with it, as far as I know. Okay, then let's move on. We'll go to Paracelsus. So Paracelsus was a Swiss physician who lived in the 16th century, and he came up with elementals. So elementals are the spirits of the four elements, and we're not talking about chemical elements here, but of the traditional mythical elements like fire, water, earth, and air.
That's right.
And according to Paracelsus, who was an actual physician, so he's not some weirdo who comes up with this mythological stuff. He's also an actual doctor.
Right.
Um, he said that the four elements were inhabited by spirits. So the water spirits and the air spirits are always female, and the fire spirits and earth spirits are always male. There's only one sex among them. So you don't have any male water spirits, for example, but you have them in mythology. So especially in Germanic mythology, you do have male mermaids. Paracelsus said no. He gave them names. So this is called an undine, and it's sometimes pronounced as ondine or undine in English with an O at the beginning. There have been ships named Ondine, for example. It's taken from the Latin word unda, which means wave. So undines are wave people or wave women. They're the water spirits. The other ones are called sylphs. Sylphs are air spirits, these female air spirits. And then among the male spirits, you have salamanders, like actual salamanders.
Right.
They live
Okay.
in they live in fire because people back in the times thought that the actual animal, salamander, was an animal that lived in fire. And I'm not sure why they thought this. But that's the name he gave his male spirits that live in fire. And the earth spirits are called gnomes.
Right.
Also always male. Okay, these elementals are humanoid, so they look exactly like people. Problem is they don't have a soul. They want a soul. They want to have a relationship with God. And that's why they go after humans. They're trying to marry humans. Because they think that if they are married to someone who has a soul, they can take part in religious practice, they can have a relationship with God, and they will also go to heaven. And they will do everything that is needed to catch someone with a soul. So, on the one hand, they will do everything you want, like the weirdest fetish you can imagine. just to trap you. And on the other hand, they're very devout Christians as soon as they're married because they want to get into heaven. And that is a bit weird that they're really open to everything on the one hand, and on the other hand, they're super religious.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. It's strange that pretty much their entire existence, the whole point of them is for the end goal to get into heaven.
Yeah.
It's certainly something.
So they're not actually interested in the people they marry. Um,
Yeah.
they're a bit like the sex demons, like incubus and succubus.
Mm. Except
Um,
they're not bothered about getting into heaven.
no, they're not. But an incubus or succubus is not interested in the person they're having sex with.
True.
They just want your sexual energy. They want to steal your sexual energy.
Yep.
So it's really
That's
not about you. It's just, they need that energy.
it's, so it's not personal. This is just business. It's true.
Yes.
It's
And
so true.
but on the one hand, you have this energy that they need, and the elementals, they're not interested in the energy, they're interested in your soul. And neither of them is particularly interested in the person.
Uh, so that's a good lesson for everybody out there. Don't trust elementals or succubus or incubi or pretty much demons in general, because they're not there for you. You have something they want.
Right. So this is Undine. Um, and she's an important mermaid. She's an Undine. Um, she is actually interested in a human man, and she chases him. There is a whole novella about this by Friedrich de la Motte Fouquet,
That's quite a
and
mouthful of a name.
that is a name. So his family was of low nobility in France, and they didn't want to get their heads chopped off during the French Revolution, so they moved over
Understandable.
to Germany. um, their French surname is de la Motte Fouquet, and he has a German first name, Friedrich. Um, yes, he wrote this novella Undine in 1811. And Hans Christian Andersen copied this. So he copied from Slavic mythology and he copied from Fouquet. And The Little Mermaid is based on these two. It's based on the Undine and it's based on the Rusalka myth.
Mm.
He wrote that in 1836. Yeah, so the Little Mermaid is not only Danish, she's also Slavic and German, and that tells you what she should look like.
Should I say something that will be incredibly jarring for the Disney fans out there then?
Oh, we'll get into Disney. I have a Black Mermaid.
Oh, I mean, they're definitely not ready for that. But I was gonna say they love Ariel so much, because it's Disney. But from our research here, it's quite clear that she probably doesn't have a soul, and the only reason she's marrying Prince Eric is not because he's human, but because she wants to get into heaven.
Yes, that's possible. Although, as I said, Undine and The Little Mermaid in Andersen's work, they are actually interested in humans. And I can tell you something shocking about The Little Mermaid. You want to hear it?
Go for it.
Andersen was a man who was not only gay, but who wanted to be a woman. And that is not something that some modern scholar in the late 20th century came up with. This has been known for a very long time. That Andersen wrote his stories to express himself and to express his need to change himself. It is thought that he had an English boyfriend, or that at least he was in love with someone who lived in England and with a man. He wrote love letters to that person. So it's not completely clear whether they were ever together, but he was definitely gay. We know that.
Mm.
And The Little Mermaid is a tale of transitioning. So I'm
Yeah.
surprised that Disney didn't jump at this because this is the trans tale from 1836.
But except he made it a mermaid, a female mermaid, but in reality, it was just a representation of him.
Yes,
That's
it's
yeah, quite something.
she gets her tail split in half to
Mm.
create human legs to make her a woman, and it hurts like crazy when she works on it hurts like crazy when she walks on these human legs. So in the story they describe it as it feels like she's stepping into knives every step.
Oof.
And this was something that was appropriate for the age. Like in the early 19th century, you had some people in France, and among them Napoleon and his wife, experimenting with genital surgery. They were trying to find out well, how to get more erotic value out of sex, to put it like that. They thought that they could do surgery and that this would improve things for them, like doing surgery on the women, that would help them to climax easier. Um, but this also came to Denmark. So people in Denmark had heard about this, about what was going on in the French court. And people were starting to talk about genital surgeries. And Anderson heard about this and he thought, oh, if I was just a woman, then it would be much easier for me to be with men. It would be socially accepted. And, maybe the boyfriend wasn't that interested in him as a man, but would have been more interested if he had been a woman. So he thought about this. He read about these things, and this tale of the little mermaid becoming a human woman, that is really a tale about him thinking about this surgery. And it's pretty devastating because, in his opinion, when you read the tale, it doesn't end well. So she gets the surgery, it works, but she can't get the man, so she dies.
Yeah, well, shit. That was quite a good 2 minutes of a horror story right there.
Yes. So this is in no way something that is woke. This is something that
Well, it's
scholars.
important. It's important to discuss these kind of things because
Yeah.
it's true when you really think about it. There's so many things, whether we know about them or not, that have happened in history, such as things like that. I mean, another great example is the name has just suddenly eluded me. God damn it. God damn it. Was it Nikola Tesla? Enigma machine. Alan Turing. That's it. Not Nikola
Oh
Tesla.
yes.
Alan Turing. Yeah, exactly. Where
Mhm.
he ends up doing all these things, but because he's a homosexual, even though he's basically helping them crack German code and everything,
Mhm.
and really help them win the war in a sense because they
Yeah.
discover that he's a homosexual and they chemically castrate him, and it's like
Mhm.
just because he has an interest in men. It's just
Yes.
it's one of those things about history that is just it's important to learn these tragedies.
Yes. I mean, I find it interesting, and it's something that is discussed in literature. Um, but to be honest, I prefer the fairy tale of the Little Mermaid. So when I watch this, I don't really want to think about the trans content that is connected to it. But of course, when you look into it, you understand that the author was thinking about transitioning, and that makes it a little more interesting in the
Yeah,
background.
absolutely. I mean, it's if anything, it's important to at least learn it. But I
Yeah.
know what you mean. It's also okay to not always be thinking about the
Right.
dark side of these stories, but it's
Yes.
still fascinating to learn. So it's I think it's good that we've at least covered it.
Exactly. You should just enjoy it. And we can go right into the colonial mermaids if you like. So there are some more real mermaids in Asia, for example. Which do you want to tackle first? Shall we go from here to the colonial mermaids, like the African mermaid, or do you want to go into the Asian ones?
I think we've touched a little bit on Asian already, so should we go to the colonial first, and then we can always circle back?
Yes, I was right about the pronunciation. It's Mami Vata with a V sound, although it's written with a W.
Hmm.
But Mami Vata is an African mermaid, and she's a colonial mermaid. So she has a fishtail. She's partly humanoid, um, and she was brought to Africa by European colonizers because this is the picture of a mermaid that is common in Europe and in the Middle East. Um, there are some stories about water spirits in the southern half of Africa, in Zimbabwe, for example, or in Cameroon. But they're usually not depicted as people with fishtails. So water spirits, yes, but not this form. The form is European or Middle Eastern. And the colonizers who brought Mami Vata to West Africa, Central Africa, and South Africa were not English colonizers. They were Portuguese, they were French, they were Dutch. So this explains why it's not pronounced Mami Wata with a W. Because they would pronounce it with a V sound. And this is a really important and successful concept for a mermaid because she's all over Africa. It's really just the north and part of the east coast that don't have her. And the Americas have her. So she is all over the Americas, north, central, south, and the Caribbean. And Mami Wata, Mami Vata. So she's not very dark, but she's colored. You can see that.
I would say so.
She has a golden fishtail. And this is an actual picture from West Africa.
Oh.
And you can see that somebody wrote on the wall behind her, Mami Water.
Because I guess that's basically what Vata translated would be, right?
Yeah, exactly. She's also called the Water Mother, for example. So she has different names in different mythologies. But she is very, very common in Africa, and she was transported to the Americas. She almost became a voodoo goddess. So she is part of these syncretistic faiths in the Americas, and by that I mean this mixture of African faiths and Catholicism and Native American mythology. So that all got mixed up, and that is known as syncretism, when you mix different religions. So she has become a spirit in these countries too, like all over America. She even exists in the American South. This one is really dark, and she looks like, well, pretty much like a European mermaid. And the whole thing started with a picture. This is the original picture, and as you can see, there is no fishtail, but there are serpents. This is actually a German picture. It's called the Snake Charmer. And people in Africa saw this. For example, I mentioned Cameroon, which is a country in West Africa, and that used to be a German colony. You also have another one in a bit further north of Cameroon. That was called Togo. Togo was also a German colony. So they probably saw this in Togo and the neighboring countries. It was a picture that became famous in the 19th century. So this is the picture that was used as the original picture of Mami Vata. Sorry, of Mami Vata. Although this has nothing to do with mermaids, as you can see, but this kind of attracted people's interest. The snakes and the beautiful woman and, the costume. So Mami Vata was modeled after this snake charmer, although it's not a picture of a mermaid. Not at all.
I guess she just evolved over time, didn't she?
Yes, the first depictions stuck to her pretty closely. As you can see in the previous picture, the golden skirt turned into golden scales, for example. Here we are talking to Disney again. Disney, why didn't we get Mami Vata?
I mean,
Because she,
we got. Well, we didn't get Mami Vata, but we got still got a black mermaid. That's the same thing, right?
not completely. So they wanted to do a colonial mermaid. I understand that. It's the Caribbean. You want someone who's black or half black. And I have a much better idea how to do this because you don't have to paint Ariel.
Yeah, she could have just had a whole separate story, right? I mean, it would have been far more appropriate if they did a Mami Vata thing. You're completely right.
Yes, why not make it an African tale? Why not connect it to African American culture? And I can tell you there is a very nice, that's called The Water Dancer.
Oh.
So Disney started working on the new Little Mermaid a couple of years ago, as far as I know, and they came out with it in 2023. This book is from 2019. They may have been able to make it into a movie. It's called The Water Dancer. The author's name is Ta-Nehisi Coates. And I had to look this up because I would have pronounced it as Ta-Nehisi Coates.
I would have mispronounced it too.
He comes from a very well-educated family, and he wrote this novel about a young mixed-race man in the 19th century during the slavery in the era of slavery in the southern United States. The young man is called Hiram Walker. So his mother is black and his father is white, and his father owned his mother as a slave. That's the story as it begins with. But it turns out that Hiram's mother is actually Mami Vata.
Oh.
So he has some special abilities. He's magical. And he's magical because his mother is this water spirit. So his white father had something going on with a black mermaid, with a voodoo character, a syncretic character. I find this really interesting, and maybe not everyone is going to align with him politically. He's quite far to the left. But I find this so interesting that he incorporated this spirit into his novel. Into his novel. So I would have liked to see this. Why not make this instead of The Little Mermaid? You could even have talked to him, and you could have made like a prequel to this book. How did things go with Mami Vata and his father, for example?
Yeah, I think there's definitely quite a cool story there. I might have to check out that book.
That would have been something original, something that is related to African Americans, that is actually related to a colonial goddess from Africa. So I don't quite understand why they didn't jump at this. And the book was there.
We'll probably never know. I guess they just don't really, they must clearly be given a certain list of things they're allowed to research and look into, and then that's kind of it. Because it does feel like they miss out on certain bits of information, even in some of their stories.
Yes, it's. I think there would have been two movies that would have been more obvious and would have been better than what they actually did. I think if they had really wanted to go into very modern content that is considered woke, they could have done the transitioning story of Hans Christian Andersen. And if they'd wanted to show a real black mermaid, they could have dipped into the Mamivata lore.
I definitely think I think that would have been a great idea.
Yes. But they're not dealing with actual African topics. They're just changing European tales. So I find
Yeah,
that a bit sad because you could do so much. Africa does have great stories.
absolutely. So why not delve into their folklore as well? I mean, you're right. Compared to just, I suppose it's just a form of reverse whitewashing, isn't it? Where they're just basically being like,
Right.
oh, okay, we're going to take this tale and we'll just make it more inclusive of other cultures. Like, well, I mean, I guess that's all right, but you're still changing what the thing already was when there's already other things you could just be covering instead. No, you're totally right.
Right. And it would help out an African American author.
Yeah, no,
So
100%.
maybe they didn't want to pay him. Maybe that's the point that Hans Christian Andersen is open source by now.
Yeah, that's probably that makes a lot of sense. It is free public domain stuff. I mean, yeah,
Right. So
anything to
not
make
good for
money.
Mr. Coates. But yes, I think that would have been the better story, and I think people would have been more interested in it because when you're changing something that is so beloved and known by so many people, and that is centered in an actual place. I mean, there is a place where this supposedly happened. Then you're just pissing people off. Like everyone knows it's a Danish mermaid, and why are you changing it? Why are you taking her and putting her somewhere else? Why are you not taking an original story and showing that on screen? And that would have been something that people probably hadn't heard of before, and that would be interesting to many people. When I just look at African Americans, for example, I think for them it would be super interesting to see that, oh, yes, there is a Black Mermaid.
Absolutely. Because another thing you got to think about is whenever they, whether you want to call it rebooting or remaking, or I suppose in this case they're making a live version of something, and they're changing core elements of what made that story what it is. You've got like obviously the younger generation being brought up,
Mm,
and they don't know the original stuff because it might be too old for them, or they just aren't really interested, or they aren't aware of it. So then they
mm,
see whatever the newest version is, and they take that as the source material, even though it's not.
right. So perhaps they will listen to us and perhaps they will do something with what we've just talked
God, I
about.
mean, we can always hope so. In which case, Disney, if you're listening and you like what we're talking about, you should email me. Let's do some business. And if not, then Ta-Nehisi Coates. If you're listening for some crazy reason, let's talk about your book because I'd be really interested in talking about that.
Yes, that's an interview.
Yeah, that'd be really fun.
Right. So this is the most common colonial mermaid because, as I said, it's essentially Africa and it's the Americas. So this legend of Mami Vata is pretty widespread, and it's widespread under a couple of different names. But other mermaids that are not part of her legend also exist in Brazil, for example, or in the Caribbean. So in the Caribbean, you have the Taínos, and the Taínos are Indios. They're natives, and they were already there when Columbus appeared. So Columbus met them, and there are stories from this area of Spanish conquest of the Caribbean, where the Spanish said, "Yeah, there's some merfolk here, and when you fall into the water and when you drown." They will get you and they will eat your toes and fingers and nose, ears, and eyes and lips.
It's
Um,
incredibly specific diet.
yes. Oh, and genitals. Sorry, I forgot the
Oh, of course,
genitals.
you,
How
you,
could
you've
I?
always got to throw genitals in there. Yeah, I mean, otherwise it's not really a threat, is it?
Yeah, toes wouldn't be that bad. Okay. So what the Spanish are describing, and what the Taino probably were describing to the Spanish, this very specific diet of the mermaids in the Caribbean, that is realistic because these parts are all small parts, and these are the parts that fish would start to eat first.
Hmm, I
So
can see that.
fish will get your eyes and your toes and your fingers and so on, and your genitals. So the Taino apparently believed that there were mer people in their area, and if you drowned, they would eat these small parts because they found people who had these small parts eaten.
Mm.
They didn't know who did it, so they couldn't imagine that fish would do that. But yeah, it's fish. That is the old story, but there are some new stories, and as I said, Brazil and the Caribbean, they have started to develop their own mermaids, and these are also colonial mermaids. There used to be a story about mermaids in the Caribbean even before Columbus sailed, so they were not in the Caribbean back then, but they became Caribbean mermaids.
Right.
There's the story of Prester John, and Prester John is a priest king who was the king of a lost Christian kingdom. And first in the 12th century, people believed that this lost kingdom was in the Middle East somewhere, or maybe India.
Mm.
So this was an Oriental kingdom. And, when Europeans started to explore all these continents, they found that there is no lost Christian kingdom in the Middle East, that there are Arabs, that there are Persians, Indians, and they're all not Christian. So they switched it around, and this is something that happened quite often. Like if you can't find the mythical island in front of the Irish coast, you have to push it across the Atlantic Ocean towards New York.
Yeah, you say it's actually no, we misunderstood the translation. It's actually over there. Kind of like how the
Yeah.
doomsday people are always like, oh, the world will end on this day
Yes.
and this year, and then that day comes and they go, yeah, no, I misunderstood the message I received. It's actually on this date, and you're like, oh yeah, okay.
Exactly. So this also happened with islands. There was an island that was supposedly off the Irish coast in the west.
Hmm.
And then people started to explore, and they realized it wasn't there. So they corrected their maps. You have old maps where the island is pretty close to Ireland, and then slightly newer maps have it a bit further to the west, and nobody had ever seen it. So this island starts moving across the Atlantic Ocean, and at one point they're just giving up because it doesn't exist. They can't find it anywhere. But
So
it's almost
they just remove it and they're like
almost
it's never happened.
yes, it's almost off the North American coast, close to New York.
Watch out, New York, an island's on its way.
Yes. So yes, they did this with the Kingdom of Prester John too. So these stories are stories that were told between the 12th and 17th century. And when they couldn't find it in the Orient, they switched to the Atlantic Ocean, said, "Oh, sorry, it's not in the East, it's in the West." Um, So it was supposedly in the Atlantic Ocean, and that is not the island off the coast of Ireland that I was talking about. That is a bit further south. So they started pushing it across the Atlantic Ocean from the Azores towards the Caribbean.
Wow.
And Columbus knew about these stories of the Lost Kingdom, and I don't know whether at his time they had already started to put it in the Atlantic Ocean. But people who sailed after him, they would hear these stories. So they started to expand on the story, and they said, yes, it's somewhere in the Caribbean. We just have to find it. There are lots of islands, and we will find it eventually. And it's a sign that we're close to it when we're seeing mermaids. And real mermaids, not the mermaids that Columbus saw. Because
none of those fake mermaids, all right? We're talking real mermaids.
Yes, so beautiful mermaids with shell bikinis. Because Columbus wrote about mermaids, and he said, yeah, we found some mermaids in this new land, but they're actually not attractive. Like, they have very masculine faces. And some of them have a mustache. He was a bit disturbed by this. But the mermaids that he found were not mermaids. They were actually manatees.
That makes a lot more sense. Men with mustaches.
So you've ever seen a manatee? Yes, they don't have these beautiful faces. They have pug faces, kind of.
I mean, they're a creature, and they deserve
Right.
love too, even if it's from a distance.
Yes, but Columbus wasn't enthusiastic about them, so he was very disappointed in these ugly mermaids.
At least he didn't try to mate with them. My God.
We don't know that.
he probably scrubbed that out of his report. He's like, no, don't tell them that part.
Yeah, I tried, but they dove away, so I couldn't follow them. So
And
yeah,
started nibbling on my toes and stuff. It was weird.
right. So that is something that that constituted the American mermaid of the Age of Exploration for a very long time. People thought they were sea cows, and I'm saying sea cows because manatees are not the only sea cows. There are also dugongs, and dugongs can exist off the coast of Africa, for example. So the Portuguese were also talking about these dugong mermaids that they found around Africa and in Asia. Yes, they confused sea cows with mermaids, and the singing actually comes from whales. So sea cows do not sing, but male humpback whales sing. And I
Back in
think
the
you've
code.
heard these whale songs.
Sorry, I was just being cheeky. You carry on.
Okay. Yes, these whale songs by humpback whales, they're not songs sung by females. These are male whales who are trying to attract females, and they come up with very complex songs. So this is not a female singing, and it's not a mermaid, it's a giant whale, and a giant horny whale at that. So that is what Columbus and the other Spanish and Portuguese explorers and the English and the French mistook for singing mermaids, the sea cows with a mustache and the singing whales. And they were disappointed in this because they had hoped that they would really look like the mermaids we know nowadays.
How dare we not find random beautiful women out in the sea?
Yes, but as we all know, if you're at sea for long enough, like if you're away from home for 2 or 3 years, your comrades and the sea cows suddenly become very attractive, and you don't care anymore that they have a mustache.
Yeah, yeah. I
That
suppose they get
happens.
some kind of a level of hallucination, yeah, don't they? Or get delirious, I suppose. That's a possibility.
Yes, I mean, it's also something that happened among settlers in North America that they said, oh, well, um, I haven't seen a woman in such a long time that my horse's back starts looking pretty attractive.
Or you could just do what the Spartans did and just be gay with each other sometimes, and that's totally acceptable. And you're like, yeah, you know what? I can see that.
Yes. Yes, and that probably happened. When we're talking about pirates, some modern scholars say there was such social cohesion among these pirates in the Caribbean, and it can't be explained just with them working together and finding treasures together. They must have been um, much closer than we thought they were. So there is research into this, and apparently a lot of these pirates were gay.
I mean, you know, the logic is there. Like you
Yeah,
said, if you're out at sea for potentially years, just surrounded by pretty much dudes. I mean, it's gonna all be dudes. Maybe a female if you're lucky, but usually it's because you took a hostage. Yeah, I mean, you just do what you do, right?
yes. So it makes sense from that point of view that it provides social glue. Um, you would be much more motivated to fight for someone that you are that close with.
True.
Yeah, but it doesn't make for a good movie. So
Yeah, Pirates of the Caribbean would be a very different film if there was a lot more of that going on.
right. That it would be weird, and you often have some gay characters in history that are just too weird to be turned into movie characters. So I understand why that didn't happen. And well, of course, in the Caribbean, you have these colonial women brought in from Europe, and they're often the daughter of someone who works there, or like the wife of someone who works there. So I understand why movies focused on them and not on pirates having fun with each other.
Yeah, yeah. There's probably there's probably videos about that, but we're not here to
It,
talk about pirates.
no. Okay. Let's move on then. So these are the colonial mermaids, and I would say we go into the Asian mermaids now, because Asian mermaids are actually original mermaids. So the colonial mermaids are usually taken from European mythology, and they're changed a little bit so they fit for a different ethnic group. or for a different religion.
Mm.
But there are original mermaids in Asia. So the whole mermaid thing, as we know it, is something that happened in Europe and Asia. And other continents didn't really come up with that type of mermaid. Among the Asian mermaids, not all have fishtails and humanoid bodies, so they look a little bit different. Keep that in mind. We'll start with Chinese mermaids, and it was very difficult to find pictures, so I don't have any pictures for them.
That's all right.
There are some mer people who are called the Deep people in the 4th century BC. But they're not really described as mermaids, so there's no good description of them. The ones that would be interesting for us are let me pronounce this in Chinese, because I know how to pronounce it in Chinese, but I need to switch sound systems.
Go for it.
So the name is Fai Jun Yu. Or
Fai
Jun Yu.
Jin Yu. Okay.
Yes, right. So I'll give you the word. I'll show you, because it's written with an R, but you can't hear an R in it. The Chinese R is pronounced as a zh.
Oh.
And Pai Zhen Yu or Zhen Yu, that means fish people. Yu is fish and Ren is people. So there's a story about fish people in China. And the Chinese describe them almost like statues or like dolphins. So they have very smooth skin, they don't have scales. But a weird feature is that they have very long and tangled hair that is often reddish, and that tangles around their bodies. And they often don't have real fish tails, so they just don't have legs. And that kind of sounds a bit like a dolphin. Well, not the hair, but the smooth skin that is often like white jade stone.
Yeah.
That could be a lightly colored dolphin. And that they don't really have a normal fish tail. Dolphins do have a tail, but it doesn't look like the tails of fish that you eat. And these Kaijin Yu, they were kept in ponds of people who were widowed. And here we are again. Because they were very human-like, and they were capable of having sexual relations with humans, but they couldn't get pregnant and couldn't get humans pregnant. Widowed men and women in China kept them in ponds and used them as sex toys. I'm not making this up.
I believe you. I believe you.
That is one story about them. So it's mentioned in several different stories. For example, when a captain encountered some of these Renew in the sea, somebody told him, yeah, this is sort of a mermaid. This is a hybrid. And by the way, it can also have sex with humans.
Spread
I
the
don't
news.
know why that was important. Yes.
Oh my god.
But that is a big part of it. And it's not entirely clear what this could be, because if it has this smooth skin like a dolphin and it does have hair, I mean, whales are not known to have hair.
Mm.
They do have hair as babies, but it vanishes. And I think it even vanishes before birth. So, yeah, you can't find hair on actual dolphins or whales.
Yeah.
No idea what this could be. That's a case for our cryptozoologists.
You
Then
heard them,
Korea,
people.
yeah. Then Korea has its own mermaid kingdom that is called Naranda,
Oh.
and that's pretty much all I could find about it. But apparently they have a mermaid kingdom underwater, and people have been there. Don't ask me how.
If anybody has potentially been to this mermaid kingdom, or lives in Korea, south or north, doesn't matter to me. Can you go ahead and weigh in on this for us because I'm incredibly curious now. We'll see if that helps.
Right. So in Japan, we have the Ningyo, as I already said, and it's not the
Mm.
same as the Ningen.
No, Ningen
Um,
is people, isn't it?
right, but it's both people. So Ningyo are just water people, and Ningen is a kind of, well, I would translate it as humanoid, probably.
Mm.
We will get into the Ningen because that's really interesting too. And these Ningyo are sometimes described as yokai,
I could see
but
that.
not always. And
Mm.
as I said, they seem to be tasty, and their flesh gives you immortality. That is the Japanese version. Then we have a version of mermaid that is common among people of Hinduistic faith. So it started in India, but it spread across the Indosphere and the Indocinosphere. And if you don't know what that is, I can't help you. Yes, of course, I can help you. Um, so in anthropology, you have cultural spheres. For example, you have the Anglosphere. And the Anglosphere is not only the community of countries that speak English as a native language, it's also the community of countries that have been influenced by English speaking nations. For example, the Philippines belong to the Anglosphere because they're influenced by the United States.
Mm.
Or India belongs to the Anglosphere because India has a couple of different languages. It's a big country, and in India, they use English as a lingua franca. So most Indian people do speak English because they needed to talk to other Indian people in India. It's
I could see
much
that.
easier to learn English for them than to learn the 60 other languages of India. So they actually use that for trade and traveling. Um, and the Anglosphere is a very well known cultural sphere, but there are other cultural spheres. For example, the Soviet sphere, that is the community of countries that used to be in the Soviet Union.
Mm.
And sometimes it's even communist countries. So that is a world spanning sphere then. But usually it's countries that are influenced by Russian art and Russian language, and sometimes just by Russian administration. The Indosphere and the Sinosphere are very important cultural spheres, and together they are the largest cultural sphere on the planet. So the Indosphere is obviously countries that were influenced by India, Hindu countries, for example, that would include places like Bali in Indonesia.
Mm.
And the Sinosphere is countries that were influenced by China. And together they are the Indo-Sinosphere, the largest cultural sphere on Earth. So in the Indo-Sinosphere, in some places like Indonesia, for example, you have a strong overlap of Indian and Chinese culture. And that is quite interesting. But it's also places like Tibet, for example, that has a strong overlap of Indian and Chinese culture. Okay, so we're going into the Indosphere, and we're talking about Hindus, and that includes Thai people, that includes Cambodians. They all have this idea of, let me read this. So the Indian mermaid, the Hindu mermaid, is called Suvarna Matcha.
One
Correct
on
me if
matcha.
I'm wrong. Roast me for my bad Indian.
But roast gently.
No, I can take it. So this name means the golden mermaid. And there is a backstory, an Indian backstory, that the golden mermaid wanted to prevent the god Hanuman, who is the monkey god of India,
Mm.
from building a bridge. And she set out to disturb him, but in the process, she fell in love with him. This is the golden goddess, the golden mermaid, and Hanuman, the monkey god. And yeah, his face looks a bit weird, but you can tell by the tail he's supposed to be a monkey.
Mm. And then his like feet is a great example because obviously
Right.
quite a few monkey species have got the I don't want to say hand feet, but you know what I'm talking about.
Right. So this is the Golden Mermaid of India. And it is quite well known in the Indosphere. So there are versions of her with slightly different sounding names, but it's mostly the same name, but with a different pronunciation or different emphasis put on it. That is an original Asian mermaid, and she does have a fishtail.
Absolutely.
Then we have Indonesia, and I'm going to show you two different pictures because there are updated versions of this. There are movies, by the way, about Indonesian mermaids. So this is, let me read this. Niai Roro Kidul. Niai means lady, Roro means girl, and Kidul means south. So it's the virgin southern lady, and she doesn't really have a fishtail in this depiction, so she doesn't need one. But modern versions and movie versions of her show her with sort of a fishtail, and there have been Asian actresses who have been portraying her. So this looks a bit more like a fishtail, although you can't see the tail fin or the feet.
Mm.
And she is the queen of the South Sea.
Huh.
Obviously, a saltwater mermaid, and she doesn't have much in common with European mermaids. So she's not a colonial mermaid, but some versions of her are influenced by Dutch, Portuguese, and Indish. Sorry. Some versions of her are influenced by Dutch, English, and Portuguese colonizers.
Right.
So, in some cases, she looks more like a European mermaid, but she existed long before Europeans showed up in Southeast Asia. Okay, then we have the Philippines, and the Philippines have mermaids that are called sirena, so like a siren. But they also have something original that is called magindara. And again, roast me if I pronounce this wrong. Magindara has a very beautiful voice, but she's also extremely vicious. So that again brings this aspect of mermaids being dangerous and trying to drown people, trying to eat people, and in general harm people. Not a nice person. And there is even a Maori mermaid. She's called Panya of the Reef. This is the statue of her, and the woman standing next to the statue was the model for this statue.
Oh.
As you can see, not a fish girl. She doesn't have a fish tail, even as a statue. But she has also been described as an Asian mermaid.
Panya of the Reef. Very cool. Okay.
So there's probably some overlap with Indonesian mermaids, with the Virgin Lady of the South Sea. And we can circle back to 1001 Nights. Um, in these Arabian tales, as I mentioned, they also have horses that mate with normal horses and create super horses. That is one thing. So that is similar to what was common in the Mediterranean, that they had these hippocampi. But they also have mermaids who you can't recognize as mermaids. So the Arabian version of the mermaid looks completely normal, is anatomically human, but they can breathe underwater. So with them, you can never tell that it's a mermaid.
Wow.
They don't even have gills.
But they can drown you.
Yes. Stay away from them.
But that's tricky. That's real tricky. Because how are you supposed to know? Like you said, there's no giveaway that tells you that they're somewhat mermaid. That's tricky.
Exactly. And a big aspect of this seems to be that they can interbreed with humans. So you wouldn't know if you hadn't married one of them.
Yeah, they
And
can play the
it's
long con.
yes, and I mean they don't have fishtails. You simply wouldn't know.
There's no feathers or bizarre
No,
skin clothing to take. No, that's
nothing.
that.
It's
That's yeah. That's I guess that's the ultimate mermaid right there. The ones that can
right.
absolutely pass off as humans.
and the horses as well. So these mermaids can interbreed with humans, and the horses can also interbreed with normal horses.
Oh.
And there's a funny thing in these Arabian mermaid tales because they kind of sell this as a utopia. So they also have this underwater kingdom, and it's kind of a very primitive communist kingdom. um, and the utopia part is that they imagine the perfect society to be like this. So in this underwater kingdom, they don't have money, they don't have clothes, everyone is equal. This is very common for utopian tales, that you imagine a society that is completely equal. But it's still a kingdom, so the king, of course, can't be equal. But the rest of the people in these underwater kingdoms are equal. And it's kind of what they wanted society to be like. So this was something that they saw as something ideal. But they invented a mermaid kingdom for this, and that's probably why they don't have fishtails, because it's really just a utopia for humans in a different place, and they chose the bottom of the sea for this.
Which then makes me think of Atlantis, even though I wouldn't say that was chosen to be at the bottom of the sea. That's just where it ended up, at least in the legends. But
Yeah.
it's still supposed to be kind of seen as like a utopia in a sense, although it's more of just a lost city, isn't it?
Yes, right. As described by Plato, it would definitely be a utopia. It would be highly civilized, and it would be destroyed by a giant catastrophe. So the people there were almost seen as gods.
Mm. I'd imagine they'd have to be somewhat perfect mermaids too to survive down there,
Or they escaped.
or they escaped, and
We
Atlantis is just down there.
I think it's still there. So there is a theory about Atlantis and that it still exists, but it's not accessible to us. But we should go into this in a different video.
Good plan.
Okay, then I have a very modern one for you,
Okay.
and that is Ronan Shah.
Ronan Shah.
Yes, so the Caspian Sea is the largest lake in the world, and it's a saltwater lake. As you can see here in the map, it's south of Russia, it's west of Central Asia. You can see Turkey on the map, and Iraq, Iran, and you can see Azerbaijan. So Azerbaijan actually has this little nose, this peninsula that reaches into the Caspian Sea. It's right after the N in the picture. Azerbaijan is nowadays a Muslim country. They have some oil. Don't tell the Americans.
I'll cut that.
um, and they have fishermen on the Caspian Sea. The Caspian Sea is so large that it is 4 times the size of Lake Superior, just to give you an idea. And Lake Superior in the United States is the second largest lake in the world.
There you go.
Yeah, so really big, salty. They have found a merperson in the Caspian Sea, and that was to be expected, I have to say. Because of course it's the largest lake in the world, so why wouldn't there be mer people? Interestingly, this mer person, Ronan Shah, seems to have a fish head. So he kind of just has the torso and the arms of a human, and the tail and the head are fish tail and fish head.
Yeah.
Very nice picture of him, and this was recently in the early 2000s. A fisherman from Azerbaijan saw this fishman in the Caspian Sea, and now they think that there are mermaids in the Caspian Sea.
That's a fair assumption.
I'm waiting for one of the surrounding countries, probably Russia, I have to say, to make a monster movie about this. Like 19th century Russian soldiers during the Russian-Turkish War encountering mer people in the Caspian Sea and fighting them with bayonets or something. That would be awesome.
That would be pretty awesome.
Good. Yeah, that is one of the newest mermaids that we have. And we have some overlap with modern mythology. So, for example, when you remember a Targatis or Melusine,
Mm.
they have an overlap with the works of H.P. Lovecraft. Because there is a different Canaanite god who is called Dagon. And
Mm.
Dagon is also a fish god. And Lovecraft used him for two different stories. One is just titled Dagon.
Yep.
That is from 1917. And there is another one, and that is one of the really famous ones. That's called The Shadow of Innsmouth from 1931. And in that story, the narrator goes to a coastal town, and the people there kind of have fish eyes, so they have some fish features, and he finds them very ugly. But well, he can tell that they are kind of fish hybrids, and they worship Dagon, this very ancient Canaanite god. And there is a twist at the end that I'm not going to tell you what it is, because you should read this. It's a short story. It's really good, and it's very disturbing. But well, Lovecraft used Dagon, and Dagon is related to Atargatis. They come from the same mythology.
That lines up. That makes a lot of sense. I definitely see quite a few similarities when it comes to at least mermaids and some Lovecraftian inspiration. Absolutely.
Right. Yeah, but that's it with the mermaids. I would find it very interesting if Vintage Aids went into the whole Louisiana mermaids a targetist thing, because I think you could make something great with that. Um, I would also I would also like to see a movie about Runanshah, about the mer people of the Caspian Sea. So there is a lot of stuff in here that would make really great stories. Um, for example, Bride Lakes is also a thing. You could write a horror story about that, about the angry brides coming after someone who did something to a woman and who was dropped off at their lake.
Absolutely.
So there are stories about that people dropped off men who had forced women at these lakes at night, and the angry brides would take care of them.
Justice.
Yeah, Ludovician sentence.
It all circles back.
Because of course.
That's great. So
So,
relevant.
okay, that's all I have for now. Would you like to tell me what you found most interesting?
Out of all the things that you've
Mm.
covered, I've got to say an awful lot of it is certainly quite interesting. Obviously, I like the little bit more information about Mummy Vata and how much more expansive she is across more than just one country. I think that's quite fascinating. And then there's even the novel which kind of delves a bit more into her as well, which is quite cool. I knew a little bit about Undine. It's a word that I had heard a couple of different times, mainly like you were saying, based on a water elemental sort of a thing, or in some cases it's about like a it's usually some kind of a female person who's affiliated with water for some crazy reason, and her name is Undine because some people just want to be clever and creative. I didn't know that salamanders. I kind of figured gnomes or dwarves would have probably been the earth elementals. I thought that made a lot of sense in my head, so I found it very funny when it was gnomes over dwarves. I thought that was like just really funny. The Starbucks thing is quite interesting with Mezzaline and how that's potentially related to I forgot the name already.
A
Atar
targetis. Yeah, Melusine
Atargatis.
and a targetis.
Yeah, yeah. Honestly, there's certainly quite a lot of really fascinating things that you found, and I mean the fact that it really reminds you the fact that there isn't one absolute pure form of a mermaid. I mean, it's the same with a lot of mythological creatures, isn't it? The fact that we all have these certain rules that we kind of stick to, but a lot of it is allowed to be a little bit more flexible, which then just it really spans all kinds of amazing depictions and stories and creative ideas behind these kind of things. And you got me really interested in Rune Shaw now. The fact that potential mermaids found in the Caspian Sea. I mean that's something I've really got to look into now. I'm really curious how what that's all about.
Yes, there is actually a book that reminded me of. So it's by a Spanish author, and I don't know if you know this, but the Spanish write really great fantasy and science fiction. There's a lot that I really like. So this author is an anthropologist, which makes it so much better for me.
Speaking your
His
language.
Right, I understand what he's doing. So he's using themes from anthropology to explain things. So that is just so great. But it's really entertaining. His name is Albert Sanchez Piñol. Um, and I would have to look up the English title of the book because I don't know whether there is an English title. But I've read it, and it's about a guy, I think from Scotland, and he comes to Antarctica. So it's not about Spanish people at all. He comes to a weather station in Antarctica, and he's supposed to work there and finally replace the original keeper of the station. And then they're attacked by mermaids, and they have to fortify this weather station. Like it's kind of, I think it's kind of like a tower. It's already sort of a fortress because the previous keeper has also worked on it. And the previous keeper also has a female mermaid in the tower that he's having an affair with. And they have to fight they have to fight off the mer people every night. So when I heard about the Runan Shah, then that was something that I could imagine in a Russian scenario on the Caspian Sea coast.
Yeah, it's quite something. That's quite. It reminds me of especially since it's some kind of a tower situation. Like there's usually a couple of different stories about like a lighthouse keeper or multiple keepers, and basically bad things are happening to. It's usually just like a little island that they're kind of settled upon, but because they're a really important part of the naval world. They have to make sure the lighthouse is working every single day so ships don't crash and everything. But there's always weird little tales that come out of some of these people, and they talk about how they might see certain bizarre things that wouldn't really be there, but it's usually because quite a few of them kind of fall to a level of deliria based on just the fact they're so isolated, and like a lot of the weather elements play tricks on them. They don't get proper food rations all the time. They might have to like resort to eating raw fish and things like that. To certain things that would just kind of really change them in a certain way, but not like physically, but more just mentally and emotionally, which then could play tricks on their minds. And so some of them would like write journals that would just have really bizarre entries, for example. Which yet again, a lot of these are just stories based on the fabrications of that idea. But there are certainly some bizarre lighthouse situations out there that I think are kind of relevant. And in some cases, they might believe they're getting attacked by fish people, just like that with the mermaids. So that's quite interesting.
Just the isolation. And I found it, by the way. It's called Cold Skin in English
Ooh.
by Albert Sanchez Piñol. Um, it's from 2002, but published in English in 2006. So really great book.
Oh yeah.
And with that background in literature that I also have, I really hope that people start to develop an interest in these books that are not so well known and these really fascinating stories, because it's so different from what you get to see that's produced by Hollywood. Um, we have a very narrow way of telling stories nowadays, I have a feeling. Um, so it's really interesting to look into that Spanish book, for example, or to look into Ta-Nehisi Coates' book, because that's a bit off from what we usually get to read.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree.
Yes, and I hope that people will find. I hope that people will feel inspired by our mermaid tales. So I'm actually waiting for a contest concerning these mermaids.
What kind of contest do you think we should do about it then?
Well, I think that people will come up with ideas, and they could use these mermaid tales, like Bride Lakes, for example. They could develop their own stories about the Bride Lakes legend or about Runan Shah. or about Melusine in the United States. So maybe they're going to transplant her to Seattle for some reason. Maybe they're going to make her a barista.
The origin of Starbucks. Honestly,
Uh,
even if it's a
yeah,
bad story, I'd want to read that. It's so funny.
I think that would be really interesting. It would be a neat little topic for fan fiction, just taking the original stories and writing about them. Um, and also, I think you could do a lot with it. You could write love stories, you could write horror stories, you could write comedy about them. So maybe a more open contest that is not so focused on horror, but that is focused on people telling their stories and working with the inspiration they got from this partially horrific topic.
Hmm.
I'm waiting for people eating mermaids.
People eating mermaids. Yeah, it all comes weirdly full circle.
Yes. Yes, Japanese people eating mermaids.
Anything for immortality, am I right?
Yes, or you could just write a story about an immortal person and like them going on adventures and like I don't know, 6 or 7 episodes in, somebody asks them, "So how did you get immortal?" "I ate a mermaid."
But then it turns out one mermaid wasn't enough, so I had to eat more mermaids.
He has to hunt them down, and it's like Captain Ahab.
Mm. I suppose that makes sense. I mean, if you eat one and that's it, you're done. Well, that's not that bad. But if it's something where it's like, oh, it gives you an extra 10 years per mermaid you eat, then all of a sudden you have to
Oh,
figure out a way to farm them and everything. And obviously that then is a big problem for mermaid people. That'd be an interesting concept.
yes, and then you get into trouble with Ronan Shah.
Yeah, exactly. See, so there's many different elements you can incorporate into the one horrific mermaid story. It's good. It's a good idea, and it can
Yeah,
all take place on a lighthouse.
I love that you're already coming up with ideas. So yes, I would really appreciate that if people came up with little mermaid stories. So not the Little Mermaid, but little stories about mermaids.
little stories about mermaids is what she's saying.
Yes,
Don't make little mermaid stories.
they can. I mean, if someone is really interested in the trans aspect, for example, but I don't know whether that would really pull in a great audience. So maybe stick to the more traditional mermaid stories. But I would love that. I would love to read what people think about it and how it inspires them, because people usually have such great ideas and they start thinking when they hear stuff like this. And Hollywood is so boring nowadays. So
Sure can
yeah,
be.
show us your ideas.
Damn right. Be creative. Share it with us. We'd love to see it. And especially if it's relevant about mermaids, then that works for this one. But it could be about other things too. That's totally fine. And who knows? Maybe if some of them are really good, maybe we'll cover them on our weird little show podcast thing we're doing right now. How'd you
Yes, you could
like
read
that?
them.
We'll cherry pick certain really good ones. We'll do a little mailbag segment. I don't know. We'll do something with it.
And if you're using this for a commercial story, you owe us a Snickers.
It's gonna have to be two because I don't share. So she gets one, I get one. And I suppose you should probably like link to us and mention our names, do stuff like that, and then that's acceptable.
Oh, I thought you would ask for money. I mean, the Snickers is for me, and you'll get the millions.
Oh well, I mean, yeah. If there's millions on the table, then obviously, yeah, that's a lot of Snickers bars we can buy. So yeah, that'd be good too. Just send money. That's fine as well. You can just contact me. We'll talk business. That's fine. Or two
Right.
Snickers bars equivalent. That's fine too.
So
It's a good
yes,
candy bar.
have fun with these ideas and show us what you think about it. Show us your stories. I'm really looking forward to this.
Damn right. Well, this has been very insightful, Ligeia. Thank you so much for educating not just myself, but I'm sure many thousands of people that will listen to this, obviously, because it's going to stay on for forever. And, inevitably it will reach thousands, which is great. And who knows, maybe 100, 200, 300 years from now, there'll be cool mermaid stories that I won't be able to read.
but that are based on our work. Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, well, in which case, then, as long as I pass these reins on to somebody else, who knows? Maybe in the future they will go on the channel. That'd be cool.
Like ninth generation Nate.
So that's a long ass time to do this stuff.
Exactly. Also, if you want to add anything, then please add it. So, as I said, I didn't find too much about the East Asian mermaids. I would be interested to expand on that. If you have anything to say to that, or even if it's something from France, for example, because France also has this very interesting mermaid lore with Melusine. And maybe you've heard stories about colonial mermaids. So, if you're from Brazil, for example, I would love to hear something from Brazil.
Absolutely. You know where we are. Leave your comments here, pop it in the Discord, send me an email, whatever it takes. Tell us the stuff. Or let us know other cool topics that you'd like us to cover as well. In which case, that's more homework for Ligeia, but I mean, probably not. She probably already has the information, but still, we want to hear what you want. And also share your cool stuff with us. Anyway, this has been Too Weird to Be True with myself, Nate, and Ligeia. This has been a great time talking about mermaids and their, well, quite frankly, their big impact in not just history but mythology as well in multiple countries across the world. It's quite fascinating, really. It really, really is. We hope you've enjoyed it, and we will catch you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much to my YouTube members and Patreon members for all the love and support. It's thanks to people like you that we can keep growing.